The most powerful woman in Manhattan stepped into her tower lobby and froze, not because of stock prices, not because of media rivals, but because the janitor mopping the marble floor wore something on a chain around his neck, a crude copper ring, wire twisted clumsily around a pale blue piece of glass, a ring that did not belong in this world of luxury, unless it was the same ring she had made with her own hands in an orphanage 20 years ago. That man. Why was he here? Vivian Hart had built her empire on control. Every acquisition, every negotiation, every public appearance was calculated down to the smallest detail. At 32, she owned Hart Tower, a 60-story monument of glass and steel in the heart of Manhattan. The business magazines called her cold. The competitors called her ruthless. She called herself Survivor. Because that was what orphans did. They survived, or they disappeared. And Vivian Hart had no intention of disappearing. She had erased every trace of her past. The records from St. Catherine's orphanage were sealed. The facility itself closed down 8 years ago. No journalist had ever connected the billionaire real estate mogul to the 12-year-old girl who once slept in a room with 7 other unwanted children. That was the point. The past was a wound, and Vivian had learned long ago that wounds only healed when you stopped touching them. But lately, something strange had been happening in her tower. Small things. The lobby flowers arranged exactly the way she preferred. White lilies tilted slightly left. The conference room chairs aligned with precision she had never requested. The hallway lights dimmed to the exact level that eased her migraines. Details that no employee handbook covered. Details that felt almost like someone was paying attention. Someone who understood her without being told. She had dismissed it as coincidence until that night. Vivian had stayed late, reviewing contracts for a property deal in Brooklyn. It was past 11 when she finally took the elevator down to the lobby. The cleaning crew worked nights, invisible to the daytime executives, who never thought about who kept their marble floors shining. She never thought about them either, until she saw him. The janitor was on his knees, wiping down the base of a column near the entrance. He moved with quiet efficiency, his motions practiced and unhurried. Just another worker in a uniform, forgettable and anonymous. Then he leaned forward, and something slipped from beneath his collar. A chain. And on that chain, a ring. Vivian stopped walking. Her heels clicked once against the marble, then nothing. She stood frozen in the middle of her own lobby, staring at a piece of jewelry that should not exist. The ring was crude, copper wire twisted around itself, wrapped clumsily around a small piece of pale blue glass. The kind of ring a child would make from scraps found in a maintenance closet. The kind of ring she had made 20 years ago, on the last night before everything changed. The janitor noticed the chain had slipped out. He tucked it back under his shirt quickly, his fingers brushing against the ring with a gentleness that made Vivian's chest tighten. Then he returned to his work, unaware that the owner of the building was standing 10 feet away, unable to breathe. She knew that ring. She had made it herself, from electrical wire she found behind the orphanage kitchen and a piece of broken soda bottle she had polished against concrete until the edges were smooth. She remembered how her fingers bled from the wire, how she didn't care because she needed to finish it before morning, before they took him away. The memory hit her like a wave she had spent 2 decades holding back. St. Catherine's orphanage, the summer she turned 12. The boy who shared his stolen peppermints and read The Little Prince with her on the storage shed roof. The boy who made her believe, for the first time in her life, that someone might actually want her around. Ethan. His name was Ethan. On their last night together, she had climbed onto that roof one final time. The social workers had already told him. He was being transferred to another facility in a different state. Budget cuts, they said. Redistribution of resources. Nobody asked the children what they wanted. Nobody ever did. So Vivian did the only thing she could think of. She made him a ring. She could still hear her own voice, high and trembling in the darkness. Don't forget me. When we grow up, I'll find you. I promise. She had slipped the ring onto his finger, the copper still warm from her hands. "This is an engagement ring. When we grow up, I'll marry you." And Ethan had smiled, that quiet, serious smile that made her feel safe, and promised he would keep it forever. The next morning, they put him in a van and drove away. Vivian ran after it until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She collapsed on the gravel driveway and watched the van disappear around the corner. She never saw him again. Until now. The janitor stood up, gathering his cleaning supplies. He had not recognized her, or if he had, he showed no sign of it. He simply moved to the next section of floor, methodical and silent. Vivian watched him from the shadows near the elevator bank, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. It was him. 20 years older, his shoulders broader, his face marked by lines that spoke of exhaustion rather than age. But it was him. Ethan. The boy from the roof. The boy she had promised to find. The boy she had never looked for. She could walk over to him right now. She could say his name, ask about the ring, watch his face when he realized who she was. But her feet would not move. Her mouth would not open. Because what would she say? "I'm sorry I never came for you. I'm sorry I became a billionaire while you became a janitor. I'm sorry I broke the only promise that ever mattered." The shame was sudden and total. She had the resources to find anyone. Private investigators, database access, connections in every corner of the country. She could have found him years ago. She could have found him the moment she had enough money to hire someone. But she didn't. She told herself she was too busy building her empire. She told herself he had probably forgotten about her. She told herself the past was better left buried. The truth was simpler and uglier. She was afraid he would hate her for abandoning him. Afraid he would want something from her she couldn't give. Afraid that seeing him would crack open the carefully constructed facade of Vivian Hart, billionaire, and reveal the terrified little girl underneath, who still cried herself to sleep sometimes, even now, even in her penthouse apartment with the $300,000 view. So she did what she always did when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. She retreated into control. She would not confront him. Not yet. She would investigate first. She would find out why he was here, whether he knew who she was, what he wanted. She would gather information and make a strategic decision based on facts, not feelings. Vivian turned and walked back to the elevator. She pressed the button for the top floor and watched the doors close, shutting out the image of Ethan on his knees, cleaning the floors of her building, wearing the ring she had given him 2 decades ago. The elevator rose through the darkness. 60 floors of glass and steel, built on ambition and ruthlessness and the absolute refusal to look back. And somewhere far below, a janitor with a copper ring continued his work, unaware that the woman who made that ring was rising above him, choosing once again to walk away. Vivian stepped out into her private office and stood at the window, looking down at the city lights. Somewhere in that darkness was the answer to a question she had spent 20 years refusing to ask. Who was Ethan Brooks now? And why, after all this time, had fate dropped him into the one place she thought she was safe? She pulled out her phone and dialed her assistant. It rang twice before a sleepy voice answered. "I need a background check," Vivian said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "One of the night janitors. His name is Ethan Brooks. I want everything. Employment history, family status, financial records. Everything." She ended the call without waiting for a response. Then she sat down at her desk and stared at the darkness beyond the glass, waiting for morning, waiting for answers, waiting for the courage she knew might never come. The background report arrived on Vivian's desk the next morning. She read it 3 times, each reading carving deeper into her chest. Ethan Brooks, 33 years old. Single father to a 6-year-old daughter named Lily. Wife deceased 2 years ago from cancer. leaving behind medical bills that still weighed on him like stones. He worked the night shift at Hart Tower and picked up day shifts at an auto repair shop across town. He had applied for the janitor position 3 months ago after seeing a flyer on a community bulletin board. There was no indication he knew who owned the building, no sign of any hidden agenda, just a man trying to keep his daughter fed and his head above water. Vivian set the folder down and stared at the wall. He hadn't come looking for her. He didn't even know she was here. For 20 years, while she built her empire and erased her past, Ethan had been living a completely separate life. He got married. He had a child. He lost his wife. He struggled. And through all of it, he kept wearing a copper ring made by a 12-year-old girl who promised to find him and never did. The relief she expected to feel never came. Instead, there was only a hollow ache spreading through her ribs. She could have found him any time. She had the money, the connections, the resources. But she chose not to look. She told herself it was practical, that the past should stay buried. The truth was uglier. She was afraid of what she would find, afraid he had forgotten her, afraid he hadn't. Over the following days, Vivian began to test him. She needed to know if he remembered. She needed to know if the ring meant anything beyond habit. So she started leaving traces of their shared past scattered through the building like breadcrumbs. The first test was a book. She placed a worn copy of The Little Prince on the waiting area table near the lobby. It was the only book in St. Catherine's library that either of them had cared about. They used to read it together on the storage shed roof, taking turns with the pages, making up different voices for the fox and the rose. She positioned it casually among the business magazines and waited. That night, she watched the security footage from her office. Ethan came through on his cleaning rounds just after midnight. He moved efficiently through the lobby, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces. Then he reached the waiting area. His hand stopped mid-motion when he saw the book. He picked it up slowly, turning it over, running his thumb across the cover. His jaw tightened. He stood there for nearly a minute, just holding it. Then he placed it back on the table, perfectly aligned with the edge, and walked away without looking back. Vivian replayed that footage 4 times. The way his fingers lingered on the spine, the way his shoulders tensed. He remembered. She was certain now. But he wasn't going to say anything. The second test was music. She had the building manager change the elevator playlist to include one specific song, an old folk tune that used to play on the crackling radio in the orphanage common room. She and Ethan would hum it together on the roof, making up lyrics about escaping to a house by the sea where no one could tell them what to do. It was their secret anthem, their small rebellion against a world that had already given up on them. She watched him again through the cameras. This time, he was alone in the service elevator when the song came on. He stood perfectly still, his mop handle gripped tight, his eyes fixed on the floor indicator above the doors. He didn't move until the song ended. When the doors opened, he stepped out quickly and disappeared down the hallway. But Vivian had seen his face. She had seen the way his expression cracked for just a moment before he rebuilt it. The third test was the cruelest. She left a single peppermint candy on the break room table, still in its wrapper. Peppermints were the only treat Ethan ever managed to steal from the orphanage kitchen. He would sneak them out in his pockets and split them with her, always giving her the bigger half. It was such a small thing, but in a place where nothing belonged to anyone, it felt like everything. The security footage showed Ethan entering the break room at 2 in the morning. He stopped when he saw the candy. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking at it like it might bite him. Then he picked it up, put it in his pocket, and left without taking anything else. He knew. He had to know someone was doing this deliberately, and he was choosing not to engage. Vivian understood then what she was dealing with. Ethan remembered everything, every detail, every promise, every betrayal. But he wasn't going to confront her. He wasn't going to ask questions or make demands. He was going to keep his head down and do his job and pretend none of it had ever happened. Because that was what people like them learned to do. They survived by not wanting too much. She should have left it alone. She should have accepted his silence as the boundary it was meant to be. But Vivian Hart had not become a billionaire by accepting boundaries. So she manufactured another encounter. She waited until his shift started, then went down to the lobby under the pretense of checking on preparations for an upcoming charity gala. He was there, just as she knew he would be, cleaning the windows near the entrance, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. She approached slowly, her heels deliberately loud on the marble. He turned when he heard her, and for one electric moment, their eyes met. "Working late tonight," Vivian said, keeping her voice neutral. "Ethan, isn't it? The night shift supervisor mentioned you've been doing excellent work." He straightened, wiping his hands on his uniform pants. "Thank you, ma'am. Just doing my job. How long have you been with us?" "About 3 months now." She nodded, pretending to consider this. "And before this? What did you do?" Ethan's expression remained carefully blank. "Various things. Construction, warehouse work, whatever paid the bills. I have a daughter, so steady hours matter more than the work itself. A daughter." Vivian let the word hang between them. "How old?" 6. "Her name is Lily." There was something in the way he said it, a softness that broke through his careful neutrality. He loved that child. It was obvious in every syllable. Vivian filed this information away, unsure why it made her chest ache. She took a step closer, close enough to see the chain disappearing beneath his collar. "That's an interesting necklace. Is it a religious symbol?" Ethan's hand moved instinctively toward his chest, covering the hidden ring. "No, ma'am. Just something personal." "May I see it?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Ethan's face went very still. For a moment, Vivian thought he might refuse. Then, slowly, he reached under his collar and pulled out the chain. The copper ring caught the light. It looked exactly as she remembered, crude and imperfect, the wire twisted in uneven loops around that pale blue piece of glass. 20 years of wear had darkened the copper and smoothed some of the rougher edges, but it was unmistakably the same ring. Her ring. The ring she made on the last night of her childhood. Vivian forced herself to breathe. "It's unusual. Where did you get it?" Ethan looked at the ring, then at her. Something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, pain, resignation. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Someone gave it to me a long time ago. Someone who made a promise." "What kind of promise?" He tucked the ring back under his shirt. "The kind people make when they're young, before they learn that promises don't survive the real world." Vivian felt the words like a slap. "You sound bitter." "Not bitter." Ethan picked up his cleaning supplies, signaling the end of the conversation. "Just realistic. She said she'd find me someday. She never did. I don't blame her. Life takes people in different directions. But I keep the ring because it reminds me that once, someone thought I was worth keeping a promise for. That's enough." He turned and walked away, leaving Vivian standing alone in the lobby. She watched him disappear around the corner, her throat tight, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. He didn't know it was her, or if he did, he was pretending not to. Either way, his message was clear. He had made his peace with being abandoned. He didn't expect anything from her anymore. The girl who made that promise was gone, and the woman who stood in her place was a stranger. Vivian returned to her office and sat in the dark for a long time. She had wanted answers. Now she had them. But they brought no comfort, only the growing certainty that she had become exactly the person she had always feared becoming. The one who leaves, the one who forgets, the one who chooses ambition over love and calls it survival. The days that followed were a strange kind of torture. Vivian threw herself into preparing for the charity gala, a major fundraising event that would bring together Manhattan's wealthiest donors. But no matter how many details she reviewed, no matter how many phone calls she took, Her mind kept drifting back to Ethan, to the ring, to the quiet devastation in his voice when he said the promise didn't survive the real world. Among the confirmed guests for the gala was Margaret Hale, a 58-year-old socialite who had once been Vivian's business partner. Their relationship had soured 3 years ago when Vivian refused to back one of Margaret's investment schemes. Since then, Margaret had made it her personal mission to undermine Vivian at every opportunity, spreading rumors, poaching clients, making snide comments at industry events. She was petty and vindictive, the kind of woman who measured her worth by the people she could humiliate. Vivian normally didn't let Margaret's behavior bother her, but knowing that woman would be in her building, breathing the same air as Ethan, made her uneasy. She gave strict instructions to the event manager to keep the cleaning staff in the back areas, away from the guests. It was a precaution, a way to control the situation. It had nothing to do with protecting anyone. The night before the gala, Ethan was assigned extra hours to help with setup. His usual babysitter canceled at the last minute. Sick with the flu, unable to take Lily, he had no other options. So he brought his daughter to Hart Tower and set her up in the staff break room with coloring books and strict instructions to stay put. Vivian found out by accident. She was walking through the back corridors, checking on preparations, when she heard a child's voice humming behind a half-open door. She stopped, curious, and looked inside. A little girl sat at the break room table, bent over a sheet of paper, crayons scattered around her. She had dark hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, and the kind of fierce concentration that children only show when they believe their work matters. Vivian watched her for a moment, something tugging at the edges of her carefully guarded heart. She pushed the door open further. "What are you drawing?" The girl looked up, startled, but not afraid. She had Ethan's eyes, serious and watchful, older than they should be. "A picture for my daddy." Vivian stepped closer, looking at the drawing. There were 3 figures: a tall man with a smile, a small girl with pigtails, and a woman with long hair standing slightly apart. Above them, the child had drawn something that looked like a ring with a blue stone. "That's my daddy," Lily explained, pointing to the tall figure. "And that's me. And that's the fairy tale girl." Vivian's breath caught. "The fairy tale girl?" Lily nodded eagerly. "Daddy tells me the story sometimes, about a girl who promised to marry him when they grew up, but she got lost and couldn't find her way back. This is the magic ring she gave him. I'm drawing a map so she can find us." Vivian lowered herself to the child's level, her knees pressing against the cold floor. The drawing was crude but earnest, a path winding through buildings, leading to a small house with a heart on the door, a map to guide a lost girl home. "Do you think she'll come back?" Vivian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lily considered the question with the gravity of a philosopher. "Daddy says good people always keep their promises. Sometimes they just need more time." She looked at Vivian with sudden interest. "Are you a good person?" The question hit Vivian like a punch to the stomach. She couldn't answer. She stood up quickly, murmured something about needing to go, and left the break room before the child could see her face crumble. She made it to her office before the tears came. She sat at her desk and cried for the first time in years. Ugly, choking sobs that shook her whole body. For the promise she had broken. For the boy who waited. For the man who stopped waiting but kept the ring anyway. For the little girl who believed in fairy tales and good people and the power of homemade maps. The night of the gala arrived with all the expected glamour. Hart Tower's lobby had been transformed into a glittering showcase of flowers, chandeliers, and champagne fountains. 300 of Manhattan's most influential figures circulated through the space, their laughter echoing off the marble walls. Vivian moved among them like a shark through water, shaking hands, accepting compliments, playing the role she had perfected over a decade of social climbing. She had given explicit instructions for the cleaning staff to remain invisible, But events have a way of defying instructions. The catering company ran short on serving platters, and someone from event management pulled Ethan from the back to help transport supplies from the kitchen. It was supposed to be a quick task, in and out, unseen. But Margaret Hale had sharp eyes and a talent for finding weakness. Ethan was crossing the edge of the main floor, a stack of plates balanced carefully in his arms, when Margaret stepped into his path. She had been drinking steadily since the event began, her voice growing louder with each glass of champagne. Well, she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. What do we have here? A janitor wandering into the party? Ethan stopped, his expression neutral. Excuse me, ma'am, just passing through. Margaret didn't move. Her eyes traveled over his uniform with theatrical disgust. Passing through? This is a charity gala, not a homeless shelter. Don't they teach you people to use the service corridors? A small crowd was beginning to form. Ethan lowered his gaze, trying to step around her. My apologies. I'll be out of your way in just a moment. But Margaret wasn't finished. She had spotted the chain around his neck, the thin silver links visible above his collar. What is that? Are you wearing jewelry to work? She reached out before anyone could stop her and yanked on the chain. The clasp broke. The copper ring flew out, spinning through the air before landing on the marble floor with a soft clink. It rolled a few inches and stopped at Margaret's feet. She looked down at it, then burst into laughter. Oh my God, is this what you're wearing? This piece of garbage? She kicked it lightly, sending it skittering across the floor. Someone should teach you that trash belongs in the trash can, not around your neck. The room had gone silent. 300 people stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Ethan's face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he set down the plates. He moved toward the ring, but Margaret stepped on it with her stiletto heel. Pathetic, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. This is why people like you stay at the bottom. No class, no standards. Just, that's enough. The voice cut through the room like a blade. Vivian emerged from the crowd, her face carved from ice. She walked directly to Margaret, stopping inches from the older woman's face. Move your foot. Margaret blinked, startled by the command. Vivian, darling, I said move your foot. Now. Something in Vivian's tone made Margaret obey. She stepped back, wobbling slightly on her heels. Vivian bent down and picked up the copper ring. She held it in her palm, looking at it for a long moment. Then she straightened and faced the room. This ring, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the lobby, is not trash. It is worth more than every piece of diamond jewelry in this room combined. She turned to look at Margaret directly. And you have no right to insult anyone who works in my building. These people keep the floors you walk on clean. They make the events you attend possible. They deserve respect, not humiliation from someone who mistakes cruelty for sophistication. The room remained frozen. Margaret's face had gone from flushed to white. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Vivian turned to Ethan and held out the ring. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw everything. The recognition, the pain, the years of silence between them. He knew. He had always known. He took the ring from her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. Thank you, he said quietly, but I don't need anyone to protect me. He tucked the ring into his pocket and walked away, his back straight, his dignity intact. The crowd parted for him like water. Vivian watched him go, feeling something inside her crack and break. Margaret had retreated to the bar, suddenly interested in her phone. The other guests resumed their conversations, the moment already becoming gossip to be shared later. But Vivian couldn't move. She stood in the middle of her own party, surrounded by 300 people, more alone than she had ever been. The next morning, she arrived at her office to find an envelope on her desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Ethan's resignation letter. 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. The reason given was simply personal matters. No forwarding address, no contact information, just a clean, final goodbye. Vivian sat down heavily in her chair, the letter trembling in her hands. She had defended him. She had stood up in front of everyone and declared his ring worth more than diamonds. But it wasn't enough. It was 20 years too late. She had chosen control over courage. She had chosen investigation over honesty. She had watched him through cameras and left breadcrumbs instead of just walking up to him and saying the truth. I'm the girl from the roof. I'm the one who promised. I'm sorry I never came. And now, he was gone. Again. Just like 20 years ago, when a van drove away and she couldn't catch it. Only this time, she wasn't a powerless child. She was a billionaire who owned the building, and she still couldn't find the courage to stop him. The tower felt different after that. The lobby was still clean, the flowers still perfectly arranged, but there was an emptiness now that no amount of money could fill. Someone else mopped the marble floors. Someone else wiped down the windows. But they didn't know about the lights she preferred, or the way she liked the chairs aligned, or any of the small details that had made her feel, for a brief moment, like someone was paying attention. Vivian Hart had built an empire on control, but she had lost the one thing that mattered by refusing to let go of it. The days after Ethan's resignation blurred together into a gray haze. Vivian went through the motions of her life, meetings, contracts, phone calls, but everything felt hollow. Her tower still gleamed, her empire still grew. But every time she walked through the lobby, she felt the absence like a missing limb. She stopped watching the security footage. There was no point anymore. The new janitor did adequate work, nothing more. The flowers were arranged wrong. The chairs sat at angles that bothered her. Small things, meaningless things, but they accumulated into a weight she couldn't shake. One night, alone in her office, Vivian opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside was a folder she hadn't touched in years. Documents from St. Catherine's orphanage, salvaged before the place closed down. She had kept them as insurance, proof of her past in case anyone tried to fabricate a different story, but she had never actually looked through them. Now she did. Old photographs, yellowed intake forms, a copy of her original birth certificate with "Father Unknown" typed in cold black letters. And beneath all of it, a single Polaroid she had forgotten she possessed. 2 children on a rooftop, silhouettes against a summer sky. She couldn't see their faces, but she remembered the moment. The night before Ethan left. The night she made the ring. She remembered what came after, too. The weeks she spent asking every staff member where they had taken him. The letters she wrote that were never mailed because she didn't have an address. The slow, grinding realization that the system didn't care about keeping children connected. They were inventory to be managed, not people with bonds worth preserving. Eventually, a family had adopted her. Good people, in their way. They gave her a new name, a new city, a new life. They encouraged her to focus on the future, not the past. And she did. She focused so hard on the future that she buried everything else beneath layers of ambition and achievement. By the time she had the resources to search for Ethan, she had convinced herself it was better not to try. Better to leave the wound closed. Better to be Vivian Hart, self-made billionaire, than the orphan girl who lost everyone she ever loved. But the wound had never really closed. It had just been waiting for someone to tear it open again. The truth hit her like a verdict. Ethan didn't abandon her. The system separated them, just as it separated thousands of other children every year. But she was the one who stopped looking. She was the one who let fear win. She was the one who broke the promise. And now, she was doing it again. Sitting in her tower, feeling sorry for herself, while Ethan was out there somewhere, struggling to raise his daughter alone. She had all the power, all the resources, all the options, and she was using none of them. Vivian closed the folder and made a decision. For once in her adult life, she would not retreat into control. She would not investigate from a distance or manipulate from the shadows. She would go to him, face to face, and tell him the truth, even if he rejected her, even if he never wanted to see her again. At least she would finally keep one promise. She found his address in the personnel files, a small apartment building in Queens, the kind of place where the hallways smelled like cooking grease and the elevators broke down twice a month. She drove there herself. No driver. No assistant. Just Vivian and her fear, and a small paper bag she had prepared that morning. The building had no doorman. She walked up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was predictably out of service. By the time she reached his door, her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She knocked before she could talk herself out of it. The door opened, and there he was. Ethan looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. He was wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans, nothing like the uniform she had always seen him in. Behind him, she could hear the sound of a cartoon playing on television. His expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, wariness. Finally, it settled into careful neutrality. "Miss Hart, what are you doing here?" Vivian swallowed hard. "I came to tell you something I should have said 20 years ago." Ethan didn't move from the doorway. "I think you've done enough. The scene at the gala, the ring. I appreciate what you were trying to do, but I don't need charity. I don't need saving." "I know." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here because I owe you an explanation." She reached into the paper bag and pulled out its contents, a spool of copper wire and a small pair of wire cutters. Ethan's eyes widened when he saw them. Vivian held them out like an offering. "I know who you are. I've known since the first night I saw the ring. I knew it was you because I'm the one who made it. 20 years ago, on the roof of St. Catherine's, the night before they took you away." The words hung between them, heavy and irreversible. Ethan's face went very still. "I promised I would find you," Vivian continued. "I promised I would marry you. And then I spent 2 decades pretending that promise never happened because I was too scared to face what I had done. I was scared you would hate me. Scared you would want something I couldn't give. Scared that if I found you, I would have to admit that I'm not the person I pretend to be." She took a shaky breath. "But I'm done being scared. I came here to ask if you would teach me how to make this ring again. Not because I deserve your forgiveness, but because I want to try. I want to be the person I should have been all along." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. His jaw tightened, then relaxed. Something shifted in his eyes. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something close to recognition. The acknowledgement of a shared wound. Before he could respond, a small figure appeared behind him. Lily peeked around her father's legs, her eyes wide with curiosity. She looked at Vivian, then at the copper wire in her hands. "Daddy," she whispered loudly, tugging on his shirt. "She has the wire. Is she the fairy tale girl?" Ethan looked down at his daughter, then back at Vivian. For the first time since she had known him, both as a boy and as a man, she saw his careful mask crack. Not with anger, not with accusation, just with the raw, exhausted hope of someone who had been waiting a very long time. He stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in." 1 year later, Hart Tower still dominated the Manhattan skyline. Vivian still ran her empire with precision and intelligence. But something had changed. The lobby had warmth now, not from the lighting or the decor, but from something less tangible. The staff smiled more. The executives lingered longer. Even the flowers seemed brighter. Vivian spent her weekends in Queens now. A small apartment with mismatched furniture and crayons scattered on the coffee table had become more home to her than her penthouse had ever been. She learned to cook simple meals, to help with homework, to sit quietly on a worn couch and watch cartoons without checking her phone. Ethan had taken a new job, manager at an auto repair shop that Vivian had quietly invested in, not for him specifically, but for the whole neighborhood. A small business grant program that helped working families build something of their own. He never asked for special treatment, and she never offered it. That was the deal they had made without words. Some evenings, after Lily went to bed, they would sit on the narrow balcony and look at the sky. The city lights drowned out most of the stars, but occasionally one would break through. On those nights, they didn't need to talk. The silence between them was different now. Not the silence of things unsaid, but the silence of things finally understood. Lily had started calling her Miss Vivi at first, then just Vivi, and lately, when she thought no one was listening, Mama Vivi. Vivian never corrected her. The word felt strange in her ears, strange, but not unwelcome. Like a language she was slowly learning to speak. On the anniversary of the night Vivian first saw the ring in her lobby, they sat together on that small balcony. Both of them wore copper rings now, handmade, imperfect, twisted wire wrapped around pale blue glass. They had made them together, side by side at Ethan's kitchen table, while Lily supervised and declared them not as pretty as Daddy's, but okay. The rings weren't beautiful by any standard. They weren't worth anything to anyone else. But they were real, and they were theirs. Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She looked at their hands, at the matching rings glinting in the dim light. Magic rings, she murmured sleepily. Does that mean we're a family now? Ethan looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Ethan. Neither of them answered with words. But when Ethan reached over and took Vivian's hand, lacing his fingers through hers, the answer was clear enough. Some promises don't need wealth to keep. They just need courage. And the willingness, after 20 years of running, to finally come home.